What do you think of when you hear the word Battlefront? Does it fill you with nostalgia, calling back to a simpler time of capturing command posts and watching wrist rockets? Does it fill you with contempt, remembering the time when the Florida of game publishers created one of the most disastrous game launches in the industry? Or maybe it's the memories of when that very same game brought about one of gaming's biggest redemption arcs to date. Hi everyone, I'm Jay, and Star Wars Battlefront is a long-standing franchise with a colorful history of success, failure, redemption, and hope. And today I'm going to take you back and tell you the story of Battlefront 2. This video will be a retrospective, a critique, and a love letter to a game with a truly remarkable journey, and by the end of it, it will hopefully illustrate why this franchise does not deserve to end here. So grab some popcorn or some weird green milk and let's go back even further, to the beginning. It all started in 2004 with Star Wars Battlefront, an action-packed success from developers Pandemic Studios, and only 1 year later, Battlefront 2 graced the world and soaked the trousers of gamers all over the globe, surpassing its predecessor, being critically acclaimed and a commercial success in every regard. LucasArts then tasked a different studio, Free Radical, to make Battlefront 3, and it was a game meant to be the culmination of the first two, a next-gen Battlefront sequel that would serve as every Star Wars fan's sticky wet dream. This title was set to be a big leap from its predecessor, with the introduction of seamless space-to-ground combat, but unfortunately, Battlefront fans never got to see it, because it got cancelled in 2008. And since then, a few of the former devs that worked on it have come forward and confirmed that what we missed out on was nearly months away from being finished, and it really was going to be an amazing game. So, that was it. At the time, this appeared to be the end of the franchise. The original Battlefront 1 and 2 were and still are beloved titles, and the highly anticipated third installment of this franchise was kidnapped, taken out back, and murdered in cold blood. Battlefront was dead. That is, until 2013, when Lucasfilm signed a deal lending a 10-year exclusive license to Star Wars games with none other than the Satan of game publishers, the shit stain you just can't clean off your toilet bowl, and everybody's favorite horrible company, EA. But all the skepticism people may have had was quickly turned into excitement as Battlefront was back. A reboot of the franchise brought 2015's Star Wars Battlefront, and this was personally my first Battlefront game, but of course, EA did what EA does best and launched the full-priced $80 game with 4 maps, and charged an additional arm, a leg, 2 kidneys, and a small home as collateral for each additional piece of content after it. The game wasn't perfect. It was only set in the original trilogy, and the launch day content was inexcusably small. But it was still Battlefront in every way, and that was enough to get people on their knees with their wallets spread wide open. EA's greed aside, the game was largely considered a success by the end of its life. But after 2 years of DLC and support was over, we were finally promised everything that Battlefront fans wanted out of this reboot. EA and DICE announced a sequel that was confirmed to include all 3 eras, and would launch with enough content to match its price tag and follow a live service model where all future updates were free. This was notably a time before the term live service was associated with dumpster fires and games launching more broken than Andrew Wilson's moral compass. And all the promises Battlefront 2 made did in fact remain true when the game launched. But what nobody expected was a disaster so catastrophic that it changed the gaming industry to its core. But Battlefront 2's story didn't end there. Somehow, the team at DICE managed to take a PR disaster larger than a Call of Duty file size and spend the next 2.5 years turning this game into everything fans hoped for and beyond. I was there when this game launched. I was there when 6 months went by without any new heroes. I was there when Ewoks became the scariest thing on Endor, and I was there when Anakin could kill everyone on the server with one button. I had my nose lodged deep in this game's chocolate starfish for almost 3 years, and by the end of its support, it was clear why this franchise is so special. The Battlefront 2 we have now is unrecognizable to the one we had at launch, and as it sits right now, Battlefront 2 is one of the best Star Wars games out there, period. But, despite this game's redemption, Battlefront 2 never reached its full potential. A product of its launch state, the game never resolved some of its core issues, and parts of it were abandoned in the effort to undo the damage that EA caused. And in 2020, when support was cut for Battlefront 2, many were disappointed, especially since it was to put more devs on Battlefield 2042, which, yeah. But personally at the time, when all this was unfolding, part of me still had this thought at the back of my mind, an idea, a spark of hope that a Battlefront 3 could be everything that this game couldn't. What we have is amazing, but I think we deserve to live in a world where a Battlefront game reaches its full potential. We deserve a game that launches without an industry-changing disaster, and a product that, at its core, delivers a fantastic game on day one, and is supported for years to come. So today, that's exactly what I'm here to talk about. Battlefront 2's life cycle, its road from disaster to redemption, everything that makes it so amazing, and everything that isn't. and how throughout its support it still never managed to fix some of its fundamental flaws. Because Battlefront is special. It's a word that instantly evokes excitement and nostalgia in millions of people. It's also an absolutely gigantic money pit that would make even Saul Goodman do a double take. Battlefront is a franchise that doesn't deserve to die. It's a franchise that has been continuously abused and mishandled. DICE spent nearly 3 years making it the best it could be, and they prove with irrefutable evidence that they care about this game and its community. And to see this franchise end here would just be so damn tragic. We deserve a Battlefront 3, and it's a shame it will never happen. In order to fully understand some of my points about Battlefront 2, I think it's important to highlight the game's lifecycle for some context. So let's start at the beginning, where a time of peace and profits was vanquished by the fall of the lootbox empire. On November 17th, 2017, Battlefront 2 released, and it was playable. It had plenty of content with 11 maps, 14 heroes, all 3 eras, and the return of trooper classes and more. The gameplay was solid and the graphics looked incredible. But this was all immediately overshadowed by the greedy, microtransaction-filled, lootbox-based progression system that made everybody's bank account tremble in fear. In Battlefront 2, your main way of upgrading your troops and your heroes is through star cards, and on launch, these star cards are only obtainable through, you guessed it, crates, otherwise known as loot boxes, which you can buy for the in-game currency credits or with the premium currency for real money. Credits were also rewarded based on match length instead of your performance, which essentially gives no incentive to play the objective or even move the controller much. But hey, it's a great way to limit the credit economy and push players to bust out their wallet though. So not only was this an $80 game with a pay-to-win lootbox based progression system that encouraged people to gamble their savings for an advantage over others, but it got even worse when people found out that you also only had a handful of heroes unlocked at launch. And in order to get each additional hero, it would take roughly 40 hours worth of matches to get enough credits to unlock just one of them. And that fact in particular led to this PR gem, which was the most downvoted Reddit post in existence at the time, which I have to say is pretty impressive. Safe to say, this game's launch sent a shockwave through the industry, and EA was immediately dick-slapped and bullied into turning off microtransactions completely, as well as unlocking all heroes by default and starting the great purge of loot boxes throughout the industry. Some countries literally passed laws to get rid of them after this. I mean, it is gambling that's accessible to children, so it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. So in the aftermath of all of this, we are left with a game that has solid gameplay, a good offering of maps and heroes, but a hollow progression system and a broken credit economy that felt horrible to progress with. Hero balance was also god-awful at this point, and the content that was in the game was heavily skewed towards the original trilogy and the sequels, which sucked for prequel fans. But the game wasn't dead yet. This may sound odd, but in 2017, Star Wars hype in all media was at an all-time high, and a month after launch we got an update tied to The Last Jedi's release in theaters that added new heroes Finn and Captain Phasma, alongside a new map on Crate. But this content was already finished at launch, and would be the last major content update for a long time. The next 3 to 4 months was a dark time of empty patches and nothing but silence from the devs. After the disastrous launch, the team at DICE had to completely rebuild the game's progression system from scratch and implement a cosmetic-based monetization method. This meant that all plans of content and expansions were indefinitely delayed until the core of the game could be repaired, which meant that all the planned prequel content that fans were desperately waiting for wouldn't be coming for a long ass time. The next 2 months consisted of tiny balance changes and nothing burger updates. In January they added a small section of the crate map to smaller game modes, and Iden Versio's TIE Fighter to the hero ship roster. Woohoo! In February, they released a new limited time mode, Jetpack Cargo, which unironically nobody asked for but was actually kinda fun. After 3 months of waiting, DICE finally rebuilt the progression system and rolled it out in March. This new progression system was based around obtaining skill points by leveling up each individual class, hero, and reinforcement, and using those skill points to upgrade the star cards that you choose. So rather than just farming for credits and getting star cards at random through crates, you now actually had to play the class or hero that you wanted the star cards for. And it was also at this point that DICE also started rolling out a bunch of new cosmetic skins that you could get for either in-game credits or the premium currency. Overall, the progression system was a vast improvement to what we had before. This update was good, but there was still a significant content drought, and nobody had any idea when or if we're going to get the prequel content or any content that we wanted. But with the core of the game repaired, DICE finally began rolling out bigger updates more frequently. The next update about a month later was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one, as we got a new game mode called Ewok Hunt. The initial reaction to this mode was a lot of, what? Why? But it turns out having a group of stormtroopers locked in first person in a dark forest and being hunted by vicious, cuddly Ewoks is incredibly fun. The mode was a huge success and unlocked a newfound phobia in players that kept them busy for a while. Another 2 months go by and we are graced with an unbelievably underwhelming solo-themed update that was tied to the release of the movie. This update added a bunch of new skins with different voice lines and face models from the movie, and the return of the mode Extraction from Battlefront 1. They also added a third version of the Millennium Falcon, which is just absurd. Like, there's 3 of the same ship in the game right now. Make it make sense. These last few updates have not been necessarily bad in any way. The Progression Fix, Ewok Hunt, and Extraction are all fine additions. But it's been 6 months since launch and there's still no sign of any new heroes, galactic assault maps, and more importantly, prequel content. There have been 2 prequel heroes in the game next to 10 original trilogy and 4 sequel heroes for 6 months now. But in June 2018, Battlefront 2 hit a turning point that paved the road to its redemption.
But that's not all. We know that you have been asking for new heroes, villains, and planets from a certain era that features a very iconic Star Wars conflict. So I'm excited to confirm that Battlefront 2 this year will be going deep into the Clone Wars.
At an EA Play showcase, Dennis Branville went on stage and announced the return to the Clone Wars, adding Geonosis to Galactic Assault, 4 new heroes, Obi-Wan Kenobi, General Grievous, Count Dooku, and Anakin Skywalker, a new squad system, and a new large-scale game mode called Capital Supremacy. And in the following months, much more was announced and set to begin arriving in the fall. This announcement absolutely reignited the community. After months of regressive cope and slowly succumbing to the dark thoughts that this game might not actually recover, finally, the game was going in the right direction. The prequels were finally getting some representation and the game was finally getting some worthwhile content. So in September of 2018, DICE added a squad system to matches, which was a great addition. Being able to spawn next to your teammate closer to the action kept the flow of each match and made for less of a running sim for bad players. And that very next month in October, the first hero since Finn and Phasma was finally released, General Grievous. With a cool as fuck moveset ripped right out of the movies, Grievous was actually super buggy and barely functioned. But nobody even cared because the Clone Wars was here and heroes were being added and everything was finally going right for the game. A month later in November, Obi-Wan Kenobi was added, alongside Geonosis and Galactic Assault as well as other small-scale game modes. Count Dooku made his way into the game in January and Anakin Skywalker in February, and when Anakin arrived, DICE took the Chosen One prophecy a little too seriously because he was absolutely overpowered as fuck. He's the only hero in the game to have a 4th ultimate style ability, which just happens to be a room nuke, and combined with his other overpowered as fuck abilities, there was no stopping this man. Anyways, in March, some much needed nerfs arrived, along with Capital Supremacy. The new flagship large-scale game mode was finally here and it was amazing. Capital Supremacy, later renamed Supremacy, is essentially Conquest, where you have to capture and hold 5 command posts on a huge map. Except instead of ending the match, the winning team progresses to an additional phase on board the enemy faction's capital ship, where in a tighter, close quarters area you have to destroy the ship from the inside before the defending team can kick you back to the ground. This mode also came alongside a new reinforcement class, the Infiltrator, where you can play as commando droids and ARC troopers too. This update was huge. Capital Supremacy became the most popular mode with only 1 map, and over the next couple of months, existing maps like Kashyyyk and Kamino were retuned and added to Supremacy. And coincidentally, a droideka was spotted in one of the images promoting the Kashyyyk map, which DICE denied as confirmation that they were coming to the game, and claimed it was in fact a crash speeder, and not a rolling ball of death. And they really held their ground here, which was kinda hilarious. Maybe it was planned, or maybe we kinda bullied them into it, I don't know, but in June, droidekas were added to the game as a new reinforcement, so it's anybody's guess. The next major update was in September of 2019. It added a new Supremacy map on Felucia, as well as new PvE game modes Co-op and Instant Action, with Co-op being a multiplayer focused mode in squads of 4 and Instant Action being played offline. Co-op quickly became very popular as people found it incredibly fun shitting on scrub AI bots and going on crazy kill streaks with minimal effort. It was also a very fast way to level up too, especially on double or triple XP weekends. So by this point, Battlefront 2 was redeemed in the players' eyes. The past year of updates was nothing but straight fire from DICE, and players got everything they've asked for since launch and more. And in December of 2019, Battlefront 2 had a soft relaunch and dropped the Celebration Edition, which was a new version of the base game with all of the game's cosmetics that they've added since launch automatically unlocked. This relaunch brought in both new players and old as the word spread of this game's redemption. Since launch, the majority of the people outside the loop had no idea how much this game had changed, and now the word was finally getting out there. This edition was also coupled with the Rise of Skywalker update, an update tied to a movie that, let's be real, nobody really cares much for. But regardless of how disliked the sequels are, this update still slapped harder than Will Smith, bringing supremacy to the sequel era on a new map, Agent Colossus, along with new reinforcements the Quebec Spy, Ovisian Gunner, First Order Jet Trooper, and Sith Trooper, which were all great additions to the game. And the First Order Jet Trooper and Sith Trooper in particular were very well designed and a lot of fun to play. That following February, the rest of the Galactic Assault maps in the sequel era were ported over to Supremacy, and the final two heroes made their way into the game. That's right, the highly requested, super popular, and iconic BB-8 and BB-9E. Okay, these were two heroes that nobody asked for, but once again were unironically way too much fun to play. BB-8 was a spinning bowling ball of death, and BB-9E can go around and tase anyone he wants like he's MJ in Spider-Man 2. With Supremacy now in both the sequel and the prequel era, only one was left. At the end of February, the first of the final batch of content hit the game with new reinforcements the Ewok Hunter and the ISB Agent, along with the first and only batch of new weapons, adding one for each class. And 2 months later, Supremacy would finally make its way to the original trilogy in Battlefront 2's final update ever. On a new map Scarif, along with the other original trilogy planets, Supremacy was here, and to no one's surprise, it was great on all maps. But this era didn't have a capital ship phase, it was just the ground phase. There was no boarding an Imperial Star Destroyer or a Rebel command ship, and the excuse for this was apparently because the Death Star 2 map wouldn't make sense to have a ship phase, since it's already a giant space station. But it became pretty obvious after this that DICE simply ran out of the time and resources to finish it. Scarif was just ported over from Battlefront 1, the Ewok was ripped straight out of Ewok Hunt, and the ISB Agent's dual-wielding animations are speculated to have been from Can, Ahsoka, and Ventress animations. Because not long after this update, they announced that support was ending for Battlefront 2, and what a sad day it was. As the devs moved on to the next Battlefield installment, boo, Battlefront 2 was over. But it's not dead yet. Even still, to this day, you won't have a hard time finding a lobby on all platforms. The PC player base has supported the game through mods, and what they've cooked up has quite literally doubled or even tripled the amount of content in the base game. Only the best of the best multiplayer titles still have a dedicated player base even 4 years after support ended for it. The legacy Battlefront 2 left behind isn't one of controversy of disaster. By the end of its life, it became one of redemption, passion, and triumph. So, how is Battlefront 2 today? When the game launched, there were a lot of things that the game got both right and wrong. But almost everything, both good and bad, was overshadowed by the gargantuan-sized loot box disaster that unfolded, and not much else was really talked about. So let's take the game as it is today and figure out what went right, what went wrong, and some much needed improvements that the game never managed to implement are, and overall how it holds up as a sequel to EA's first Battlefront, a game on its own merits and a continuation of the franchise as a whole. I think the cornerstone of what makes a Battlefront game so special has to be its ability to capture the Star Wars fantasy. Engrossing yourself in a world you love so much, playing as your favorite characters in locations ripped right out of the movies, just tickles the nostalgic part of my brain in all the right ways. Being a clone trooper and listening to the clone commander give orders, being a stormtrooper serving the Empire, having a lightsaber duel in the same place as your favorite scene from one of the films. The idea that the battle you're a part of right now might as well have been ripped right out of the movies. The way a Battlefront game allows us to immerse ourselves in the Star Wars galaxy as we want to is what makes it so special, and it perfectly meshes with the bombastic multiplayer fun that is so integral to any shooter, and that is exactly what Battlefront 2 does so well. All 9 movies are represented, every iconic location and hero is in the game. Of course, there's so much more we can want, there always is, but what we have is more than enough. The game is jaw-droppingly gorgeous, the maps are meticulously designed to be accurate to the films while still playing very well gameplay-wise. The sound design is great, and the music is of course perfect. And returning actors from the films and TV shows doesn't hurt the immersion when playing these heroes. Except for you, Kylo Ren. Cowards! They couldn't get Adam Driver to voice him, and you can tell. This game is just Star Wars in every sense of the word. You're so easily immersed in the world. You really do feel like a clone trooper, or a rebel fighter, or a separatist droid. It's damn near indistinguishable from the films. It's an immersive, nostalgic experience that still leaves plenty of room for player expression and insanely fun multiplayer encounters, and there's just nothing else like it, and that is at the core of what makes Battlefront 2 so awesome. But it's also more than that. The game is just straight up fun. Onto the gameplay elements, when it comes to troopers, the core combat is pretty good, and that's important. The gunplay is solid, it feels good to shoot things, the blasters sound and feel very Star Wars. The change back to trooper classes is also much preferred to Battlefront 1, and the return of reinforcements is a nice bridge of variety and a great addition to the game. However, I'd say the biggest major improvement from the first game has to be the battle point system. Battlefront 1 used randomly spawned pickups in order to play heroes, and it resulted in some players abusing it and camping the spots all day and others never touching a hero in their lifespan. And in Battlefront 2, for every kill, assist, and objective play you get battle points. And you spend these points in match to play as reinforcements, vehicles, and heroes. This is a skill-based system that promotes objective play and rewards good players, and it's great. It's first come, first serve. The best player in the lobby gets to pick the hero first. The system isn't perfect though, there are a few problems. Mostly when half the lobby ends up sitting in the menu spamming the select button over whatever hero they wanted to play. Being subjected to abusing your controller or making your girlfriend jealous just to play as the hero you want before the other 12 people who are doing the exact same thing get to it first is not great. An easy solution to this would just be to add a queue. The third guy who gets enough battle points can queue for the hero they want, and maybe a second option in case that hero is already selected. I'm not the first person to say this, and I won't be the last. But there's also another problem that's not attributed to this system directly, but is more of an issue with being able to abuse it. And I'm of course talking about the officer class having an unfair advantage in getting battle points significantly faster than the other classes. One of the star cards they can equip is called Officer's Presence, and it literally gives you free battle points just for standing near teammates. And even post nerf, you can accumulate quite a few of them. Combine this with the Bounty Hunter card and you can get a hero in minutes. I would also say that the Bounty Hunter card as a whole would be better if it wasn't in the game. Because if you do want to play a hero or reinforcement, which let's be honest is the whole reason you're playing those modes, then this card becomes essential, and is just one less slot in your class that could be used for something gameplay related. I just think it'd be better if everybody was on the same playing field. But overall, the battle point system is a major improvement, and this would be the ideal way to do it going forward if we ever see another Battlefront game again. Which we won't, but if we did, this would be the way to do it. A man can hope. Another thing this game gets right is the absolute variety and quality of the game modes on offer here. Supremacy is everyone's go-to large-scale game mode. You can pick which era you want to play in and have the true Battlefront experience. It's large-scale, open warfare on huge conquest maps, and it's beautiful. There is one problem with this mode though. If you successfully defend your capital ship after the enemy boards it, then everybody returns to the ground phase, and there's no limit to how many times this can happen. Which means some matches can last way too long. There needs to be some sort of tiebreaker system, maybe whoever has less damage to the ship wins or something, I don't know. But matches can actually last hours, and they just shouldn't. But before there was Supremacy, Galactic Assault was the flagship large-scale mode that everybody played, and every map is carefully designed with 3 to 4 unique phases. Overtime matches had the potential to get insanely tense, and going on a crazy kill streak with a hero is a feeling so good I can't even describe it. Galactic Assault has the perfect balance between large-scale battles and fast-paced, close-quarter scenarios, and honestly, I might even prefer it to Supremacy. It's a crime that they kinda abandoned this mode in the last year or so of the game. They didn't add any new maps to it after Geonosis, and it now sits hidden away in the More tab with the other lesser played game modes. Anyways, moving on, Heroes vs Villains is hands down the most popular mode next to Supremacy. It's a simple 4v4 team deathmatch, and it's great when the matchmaking's balanced. But if not, it devolves into a 4v1 clusterfuck and it becomes frustrating really quickly. But overall, it's still a lot of fun. Hero Showdown is also a sleeper hit. When this was added, there was finally a mode where you can have those 1v1 or 2v2 small scale duels that are a lot of fun with a friend. Hero modes are undeniably the most popular, and I wish there were more of them. But on the other hand, small scale game modes like Blast, Strike, and Extraction are great for some trooper class action, but are mostly dead these days. DICE has thoroughly left the trooper side of the game dry and untouched throughout its support, which is a shame. I've already talked about how great Ewok Hunt is, which just leaves Starfighter Assault, the undeniably impressive ship battle mode that Respawn developed for DICE. And this mode has always been a niche side of the game, as most players just prefer to spend their time in the trooper and hero modes, but that doesn't mean this mode wasn't incredibly well designed, and for those who like flying, we're right at home with it. And unfortunately, it also goes down as another tragic victim of abandonment, as there wasn't any new maps or anything added to it since the Last Jedi update, which was a month after launch, which is a shame. Oh, there's also Hero Starfighters, which I played like once when it came out. There has to be some way of leveling hero ships, I guess, and this is it. So yeah, it's fine, but not really for me. Now onto the smaller issues that still exist in the game that, if it was still supported, could have seen improvements to. And honestly, it's kind of baffling that they weren't when the game was still supported, but anyways, weapon balance is something that has never properly been addressed. While heroes have been receiving balance patches all the way through the game's support, and now sit in a very balanced state, trooper weapons not so much. For every class, out of the 5 available weapons, there's really only one worth using in each of them, and it's not even close. The only exception to this is the Assault class, as the A280 and the EL16 are both very strong options, but every other class has one good weapon and 4 others that are nowhere near as good. The Assault class's CR2 was very good at launch, but it was nerfed into the ground pretty quickly and has been dead ever since. The Officer's Blurg was also a good weapon at 1.2, but DICE nerfed it, and the SC-44 quickly became the superior pick. There's only one sniper rifle that can one-shot enemies in the game, and the default weapons across the board are straight garbage. Throughout 2.5 years, DICE has continuously overlooked weapon balance, only nerfing guns that are deemed too strong and overlooking the weapons that are too weak. What this results in is a stale meta that barely changed throughout the game's support. And if DICE put just a little more effort into buffing some of the lesser used weapons, then today I might be able to have a lot more variety with the trooper gameplay. Because as it sits, the limited viable weapon options have grown incredibly stale. Or maybe I just play the game too much. With everything that this game achieved, there still remain various problems that DICE never managed to fix. I've talked about some of the smaller issues that would have likely made it into the game if it continued its support. But there are also some deeper, more fundamental flaws that are still baked into the core of this game, and huge parts of it were left completely and utterly abandoned. And in combination, this left a huge gaping sarlacc pit of unrealized potential that Battlefront 2 failed to harness. Some of these problems, most of them really, would have been unrealistic to see resolved in Battlefront 2 without another complete rework of its core systems, or some serious dev time being allocated to it. Which is why what I'm going to talk about wouldn't have worked in Battlefront 2, but absolutely could in a Battlefront 3. For everything that Battlefront 2 achieved, I just can't help but think about ways it could have been even better, and that is what I want to talk about. DICE spent months rebuilding the game's progression system from the ground up, and it was a huge improvement over the one we had at launch. The skill point system is simple. You play as your class or hero and you get the points to upgrade star cards with. Straightforward, but also shallow. This system alone leaves little room for depth, because star cards are the only thing you can progress in the game. You unlock all of the guns pretty early on, and that leaves just one avenue of progression, and that's not enough. For trooper classes, there are both ability cards and boost cards, and ability cards change your class's abilities and equipment, while boost cards are your standard stat buffs. And for troopers, there is a much wider variety of cards to pick between, and ones that actually offer a lot of depth with different equipment, abilities, etc. Do throw in an iron grenade on your assault class if you want to deal with vehicles and turrets easier, or maybe you want to make a melee build for specialists, using the personal shield and increased melee damage cards. The combination of boost cards and ability cards leaves a good variety of options to pick between, and a satisfying progression feel because of it. But for heroes, there are only boost cards, and for 90% of them there are almost always 3 standout options that leave little room for experimentation or variety. With Vader, his best 3 cards give him more health, damage reduction when focus rage is active, and a farther saber throw, and there's never any real reason to switch between his other cards. They are just worse. And as a whole, these cards don't offer much depth gameplay wise either, and this extends to the entire cast. The only exception I can think of is wanting to swap to Luke's star card that gives him more knockback on his force push, for those maps with a lot of ledges. But I have never once swapped another star card on any other hero. I also think that heroes would benefit from having star cards that modified or augmented their abilities more significantly. Having a card that makes Maul's saber throw horizontal at the cost of range, or one that makes Leia's secondary fire into a short range shotgun beam, or one that replaces Aiden's pulse cannon with something completely different. I'm just spitballing here, the possibilities are endless. But I think these types of cards would not only make the gameplay more dynamic, but allow for actual build crafting for heroes. The star card system is not bad by any means. For troopers, I would say it's pretty good even, and for heroes it's just fine, but it lacks the level of depth and variety with the limited number of options. If DICE were to have added more star cards throughout the game's support, I think trooper and hero progression would feel a lot more dynamic and less shallow than it does now. But progression in this game has to be more than just star cards. There aren't nearly enough guns to unlock and upgrade for troopers. They've added one set of blasters since launch, putting the total to 5 for each class, which includes the garbage starter weapon that doesn't even have any attachments. Also, speaking of attachments, this system is also laughably shallow. You can unlock only 3 different attachments for each weapon and equip 2 of them. And while some of these attachments do dramatically improve the weapon, others like the flashlight or ion shot are just completely useless. Let's remember that this is first and foremost a third-person shooter, and it's a shooter that barely has any guns to unlock and barely any customization to those guns. After 2.5 years of support, there should be at least double the weapon options per class. And why shouldn't the attachment system be even half as deep as it is in a Call of Duty or a Battlefield game? Why can't there be dozens of unlockable attachments to improve and modify each weapon with? Why shouldn't there be a much needed layer of variety to trooper gameplay? In a class-based shooter, its classes have been thoroughly abandoned, making them the least interesting and the least exciting part of the game. And of course, heroes and reinforcements are inherently more exciting to play as, of course they are. But troopers are what you'll be doing for the majority of your matches. There are not enough weapons and ways to modify them to keep that gameplay engaging, and this results in a game that feels somewhat incomplete. This game has plenty of heroes, reinforcements, and maps, yes, but there's nothing beneath the surface here. There's only one way to play each hero, one good weapon in a very small pool for each class, and this leaves the majority of the game's progression feeling hollow and unfinished. If not for this game's disastrous launch, I'd bet good money that weapons, attachments, and even star cards would have seen huge improvements and additions, but unfortunately they were left abandoned and untouched throughout the game's support, leaving a huge gap in this game's progression and a big waste of potential. And the shallow progression that this game was left with couldn't be more apparent when looking at the game's credit economy. The only thing you can spend credits on are skins. And if you have the Celebration Edition, then you have all the skins, and credits are absolutely useless. Other than star cards and 4 weapons, there is nothing else in the game to unlock. I have almost 400,000 credits and have absolutely nothing to spend them on. Battlefront 2 never attempted to add or improve its progression since the skill point system was implemented, and I don't blame them for it. But if there were more weapons, more attachments, maybe even separate equipment slots instead of ability cards for even more build variety, then this could have fleshed out the progression and given this game some much needed depth. The point of a progression system is to give players a reason to play outside of the initial enjoyment factors. Having things to grind for, both short and long-term goals, is an essential component in keeping you playing. You unlock all of the weapons in this game very quickly, and after that there are only star cards to upgrade, and once you hit level 70 with each class and level 40 with every hero, there's just nothing more to do. The broken credit economy also meant that this game failed at monetization. If you played the game consistently, then you had more than enough credits to get any skins you wanted, and they just didn't put them out fast enough to keep up. If there were more things to spend credits on, then this would be a completely different story. People would have been more inclined to spend money on these skins because they are all awesome. I'm looking at you, Wounded Chewie. And I'm not saying that being pushed to spend money here is a good thing. The fact is, you can get all these skins for free, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But I'd also bet that it's pretty likely that part of the reason DICE isn't making a Battlefront 3 right now is because the game didn't generate a lot of continuous revenue with its microtransactions. And there is just limitless potential for some of the skins we could see in this game, and I know I'd pay good money for them, but I wouldn't have to because I have 400,000 credits and not a single progression avenue to spend them on. Okay, that's the big issue I have, but there's also another core element of the game that in my opinion has been quite flawed since launch: the lightsaber combat. Saber combat has always been clunky and inconsistent with its hit detection. I can't count the number of times I've attacked with a lightsaber, snapped to the target in front of me, and visually hit them only to do 0 damage. It happens a lot and it's weird. And using a lightsaber hero against troopers and blaster heroes works well enough, but when it comes to saber on saber fights, it becomes a frustrating frenzy of spamming clunky attacks at each other, blocking till your stamina runs out, and frantically trying to dodge behind them or use an ability to ragdoll them to the ground. It just doesn't feel great most of the time. However, it isn't a completely brain-dead system. There is some level of mastery to it. Knowing when to block and when to attack and getting good at dodging around enemies is a small level of depth that makes fights somewhat enjoyable, but the animations are still clunky and very janky. This just isn't a system that makes it feel like I'm having a lightsaber duel. It feels more like 2 dudes mashing heavy sticks at each other. Let's compare this to Jedi Survivor, a PvE game, yes, and I'm not going to pretend that these games are comparable at every level, but if the heroes in Battlefront had attack animations that looked even half as clean as they do in Survivor, then this would be a different game. If there was more depth to saber combat, like a proper parry system, light and heavy attacks, and more dynamic ways to break through blocks and whittle down stamina, and more importantly, better animations and hit detection, then I think Battlefront 2's lightsaber combat would be a whole lot more fun. I'm not going to pretend like I'm a game dev here. Maybe it's the engine or the netcode, or maybe it's just a lot tougher to achieve this in a multiplayer game, I don't know. But surely there's a better version of lightsaber combat somewhere here, because it is by far the weakest gameplay part of this game. The point I have hopefully illustrated for you here is that as great as Battlefront 2 is, its progression was flawed from the start. DICE did what they could, and the new system they implemented was better than the shitty loot boxes, but ultimately still had problems and lacked long-term progression, variety, and depth. And the lightsaber combat has just always been clunky, awkward, and janky. I want to emphasize that this is all coming from someone who has a lot of hours in this game, and that's because I goddamn love it. I don't think this game's progression or saber combat is the worst thing to ever exist and I hate it with all of my existence. I just think it's nowhere near as good as it can be. And if we ever do see a Battlefront 3, I'd want that to be rectified. Okay, let's shift gears away from the multiplayer side and talk about a part of this game that EA's Battlefront 1 was seriously lacking, a campaign. And the one we got in Battlefront 2 was unfortunately a huge disappointment. When people talk about Battlefront 2 today, I don't think anyone even remembers that it has a campaign, and that's because it really is that forgettable. Before Battlefront 2's launch, this campaign was a big selling point of the game. A story following the aftermath of the Empire's fall from the perspective of an elite Imperial soldier just sounded awesome. Seeing the events of the original trilogy through the bad guy's perspective was a premise that was extremely interesting, and at the time wasn't something we've seen before in Star Wars. But what was marketed was not at all what this campaign turned out to be. Our protagonist Iden Versio was aligned with the Empire for like 20 minutes maybe, before immediately defecting. And from there on, the campaign quickly devolves into a generic, predictable, and bafflingly short experience. Ultimately, it's a 4-hour waste of potential with a bait-and-switch narrative that has a few redeeming qualities, yes, but only in very short spurts, and they don't make up for the rest of the campaign being so generic, predictable, and boring. Starting with a basic synopsis of the plot, the story follows Iden, the leader of Inferno Squad, and her squad members Del and Hask as they navigate the events that occur after the return of the Jedi. And the campaign starts out relatively strong. Iden is captured by rebel forces and uses her helmet, which is conveniently left in the room with her for some reason, to contact her droid and escape. We then find ourselves on Endor in an attempt to stop the rebels, and it's here where there's ever so briefly some actually interesting character stuff. The Death Star 2 blows up, and Iden and her team are in shock. They just lost. The state of the Empire as a whole is in question, and they aren't sure what to do. Seeing an Imperial perspective of the Death Star's destruction is fascinating, humanizing members of a faction that have been nothing but a faceless representation of evil for decades. But this lasts like 30 seconds before we're back to clearing waves of aimless bots. After Inferno Squad evacuates Endor, the Emperor's contingency plan, Operation Cinder, begins. And this genius plan consists of bombing the shit out of random planets, trying to instill fear and establish the Empire's strength again. And when one of those planets just happens to be Iden's homeworld, she goes, "Oh wait, you guys are bad?" and defects immediately. That's right, the commander of an elite Imperial squad, whose dad is also a high-ranking admiral, who would have clearly raised her to be taught nothing but the Empire's philosophy, and she just turns into a rebel hero just like that. There wasn't even much hesitation. At least Del's turn was a lot more convincing. In the mission before Iden's turn, you get what's probably the best mission of the whole campaign. You play as Luke Skywalker as he encounters Del, and they kinda help each other out. And this is probably one of the best iterations we've ever seen of Luke post-Return of the Jedi. I mean, they just nailed his character here. And Del quickly sees the compassion and kindness in Luke and realizes that the Empire's perspective and everything that they've led him to believe might just be construed and misguided. The dialogue and character work between these two characters is genuinely great, and I wish the rest of the campaign kept this up. But it doesn't. But back to Iden, her and Del escape Vardos and immediately surrender to the rebellion. They warn them about Operation Cinder and are asked to help stop it, but they're like, "Nah, we ain't joining your rebellion." But then they go anyways and immediately change their minds after a mission with Princess Leia. Months go by and Iden and Del are respected rebel fighters now. We get a mission with Han Solo that has nothing to do with the plot, and then Iden decides to track down Hask and her father, and we get a pretty underwhelming mission with a lot of repetitive objectives and lackluster story beats. And then we get a pretty good mission with Lando and Shriv. And by the way, Shriv is hands down the best new character in the entire campaign. He's hilarious, and whenever Shriv is talking, I'm having 15% more fun. Anyways, Lando and Shriv nuke a factory on Sullust, and now it's time for the Battle of Jakku. Climax of the story, and what's supposed to be the Empire's last stand. and it is unbelievably underwhelming and short. The mission boils down to some space battles, some ground battles, and more space battles, culminating in a dogfight with Hask's ship. Aiden then boards her father's Star Destroyer, and when it's about to blow up, they have a touching moment, and he chooses to stay on board and die with his ship and the Empire. And just like that, the good guys win, and yay, it's over. This entire story, but especially this final mission, is unbelievably rushed. This battle could have been an all-out war spectacle. There's a million different ways that this could have been more interesting. Where were Luke, Leia, Han, and Lando throughout all of this? This could have been so much more than just some lame dogfights, some lame ground objectives, and more lame dogfights, but it's not. It's just an extremely forgettable experience that isn't the worst thing in the world, but I'm glad it's over, and I've already forgotten about it. Because overall, the campaign is a letdown. The small parts I enjoyed about it had nothing to do with Aiden or her story, and her motivations and choices are extremely rushed. After a lifetime of loyally serving the Empire, she defects almost on a dime without giving it a second thought. And her choice to join the rebellion is also given zero development or nuance. And choosing to leave the Empire and choosing to fight them are two very different things. And Aiden goes from nah I'm good to elite rebel commander in seconds. But aside from generic story with messy character motivations, the gameplay side of this wasn't doing it any favors either. 99% of the missions just boiled down to clearing hordes of brainless AI enemies, or doing the same objective 2 to 3 times in a row, which just gets repetitive. And it's really annoying how your weapons and equipment resets after each mission and you have to stop and change it back to what you want every single time. But unfortunately, it doesn't end here, because when the Last Jedi update arrived, a new chapter of Aiden's story also came, called Resurrection. Set during The Force Awakens, Aiden searches for Del with her daughter Zay and ends up uncovering a dark secret about the First Order. And it's about what you'd expect based on the main campaign. It's only 3 missions with a lot of repetitive gameplay objectives, a rushed and cobbled together story, and playing through it is instantly forgettable. When Aiden finds out that Hask is in fact alive, and he actually just murdered her husband, the father of her child Del, she barely reacts. Anyways, 2 monotonous missions later, and we find out that Project Resurrection is the First Order's recruitment program for stormtroopers, and it consists of kidnapping babies and forcing them to a life of bad aim. And not long after this, it all ends with Aiden finally killing Hask for real this time, and then she just dies, after saying bye to her daughter and leaving her with some intel about Project Resurrection for the Resistance. And that's it. Short, but not particularly sweet, and it's kind of an extension of how forgettable the main campaign was. There really isn't much else to say here. This expansion has all of the same problems as the main story, except there aren't any redeeming qualities in this hour-long expansion. So overall, the whole of the campaign is underwhelming, generic, and not as advertised, and is ultimately a pretty big disappointment. The fact is, Star Wars Battlefront is an insanely popular IP. It's by far one of the most successful Star Wars franchises to date, and with Battlefront 2 being considered one of, if not the best, Star Wars multiplayer experiences ever, this cannot be the end of the franchise. A Battlefront 3 can be everything that its predecessor couldn't. It could have a better campaign, refined lightsaber combat, a fleshed out progression system that doesn't need a rushed rework, and so much more. Even outside of merely fixing Battlefront 2's flaws, there's still so much room for this franchise to innovate and grow. Space-to-ground combat is the next major leap we've been waiting for. It was taken away from us with the original Battlefront 3's cancellation, and we deserve a chance to see it. I also think a game more focused on this franchise's most popular aspects, like large-scale battles and hero modes, would be another huge step up. Having more large-scale game mode offerings similar to a Battlefield game, and more carefully designed hero modes with objective-based gameplay can create this unique hero shooter / large-scale battle hybrid identity that combines the 2 best parts of a Battlefront game and puts them front and center. And this is just something to think about. And my god, there are so many classes, heroes, reinforcements, and maps we haven't seen yet. There's still so much Star Wars to put in this franchise. Imagine a campaign following a squad of clone commandos, or a game with heroes like Ahsoka, Ventress, Mando, Moff Gideon, Jango, Padme, Mace Windu, Qui-Gon, and maps like Mustafar, Utapau, Coruscant, Umbara. I could do this all day. The potential that this franchise has is so rich. There are so many ways to elevate it to even greater heights. The more I think about it, the further I drift into a deep, somber sadness. Because we will most likely never see a Battlefront 3. DICE pitched it to EA, but they turned it down due to licensing costs. And what an absolutely baffling decision that was. I thought EA liked money. Battlefront 2 had one of the most disastrous launches of all time, and it still sold very well with 1.2 million copies in its first month, and over 9 million by 2020. EA, imagine the money you can make off of game sales alone if Battlefront 3 is actually good at launch. But regardless, the sad truth is, at this point, I don't even want to see a Battlefront 3 from EA. Everyone at DICE that made the first two what it was are mostly gone, and frankly, EA has done enough damage to this franchise. If we were to get a Battlefront 3 at some point in the future, it would most likely be from somebody else. Even though personally, I think Respawn could make a pretty kick-ass Battlefront game, but they're still EA and that will never happen. And if another developer did decide to take a crack at this franchise, it would be yet another reboot, which hey, maybe it's time for one. But I also think the title Battlefront 3 just carries so much weight. Twice now we've watched it get gunned down right before our eyes. And since the first Battlefront 3's cancellation, this franchise has been abused more than an ultra-elastic pulsating fleshlight. The title Battlefront 3 doesn't have to be a sequel to EA's Battlefront, nor Pandemic Studios. It's a title that can signify this franchise finally breaking through the mold of misuse and disrespect it's been cast in. We deserve to see this franchise be honored for once, but let's be honest with ourselves here, a Battlefront 3 today would probably have a battle pass, an overpriced shop, and Lord help me a free-to-play pricing model. It could most definitely drown us in the live service garbage that we've grown far too accustomed to these days. But that doesn't change the fact that this franchise is a gigantic pile of unrealized potential and money that is just sitting there with every game publisher walking right past it. In March of 2024, developer Aspyr released a remastered port of the classic Battlefront games, and this collection's announcement absolutely reignited the Battlefront community. The hype absolutely took over the gaming scene by storm. Fans were reeling with excitement at the thought of anything Battlefront related returning. A simple port of two games that are over 20 years old generated so much hype and excitement because those games are just that good. And some of us thought, maybe, just maybe, all of this traction could prove to publishers that there is value in this franchise. But of course, even that was short-lived as the Classic Collection launched in a near unplayable state, and the hype died as quickly as it lived. But let's end this video with some optimism, because we may never see a game titled Star Wars Battlefront 3 in our lifetime, but we sure as fuck deserve one. Battlefront 2's journey from disaster to redemption is incredible, and it still has so much room to grow and evolve, and we deserve a chance to see that happen. Battlefront 2 wasn't perfect, the campaign is disappointing, its progression is flawed, and they never quite nailed the lightsaber combat. But goddammit, we deserve to see what it would look like if this game started strong out of the gate. We deserve to see a game where Battlefront 2's potential is fully realized. We deserve to see this franchise handled in a way that honors its legacy. And that is why we deserve a Battlefront 3. Well, that's it for me. If you couldn't tell by now, I'm a relatively big Star Wars fan, and Battlefront has always been a very special franchise to me. If you're still watching, thanks for sticking around, and leave a comment down below what you want to see in a Battlefront 3 one day. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like button and subscribing for more from me in the future. You can check out a playlist of all of my long-form content at the end card. And thanks again. I'm Jay, and I'm done talking. Bye.